of the best topics of the series that we've had this year. The four cities combined. But obviously the manufacturing topic did touch a lot of chords here in the room. Mergers of companies, two companies with vastly different cultures, different work processes, different people practices is always a complex thing, difficult. Like I was discussing with one of the panelists outside before we started this session. Sometimes the mergers just don't work and you just have to go away, part ways. And most of that will have to do with the people issue. So it's a complex thing, and how do the best people manage to do it? How did they do it over the years, and how have they successfully managed to integrate? So let's see who will join us today. So first may I call on Ajay Bhatt of Abbott, India. So Ajay is the Regional HR Director for India at Abbott. Abbott, of course, is one of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies. If you remember, all of us know that Abbott bought Piramal's healthcare business a couple of years ago, and Ajay has played a key role in the integration of the two companies, besides several other acquisitions of Abbott as well. So Ajay has earlier worked with Torrent Pharma, with Zydus, and Sun Pharma, big names. He's a qualified pilot and loves to fly. Maybe I should come with you one of these days. Okay, Ajay, thanks a lot for joining us today. And then next, may I call on Mr. Vineet from Hindalco. I think the Hindalco deal, where it bought Novelis in 2007, much after, I think a few months after Tata Steel had bought Chorus. Two really big deals, and then a year later, Tata Motors bought Jaguar Land Rover. I think these were deals that were not just corporate deals, but it actually stirred a chord in many Indians' hearts that yes, we could go out and buy really big companies, even worldwide, right? So that sense of pride was built by these great companies, and Mr. Kaul here has played a key role in integrating, the continuing integration of Hindalco Novelis, and I'm sure we'll have many takeaways from him. He's been in HR for 39 years, which is a long time. Before Hindalco, he was with Philips Electronics. Thank you very much, Mr. Kaul, for joining us tonight. Then may I call on Rajeshwar Tripathi from Mahindra & Mahindra. Another big company, another big person. Mr. Tripathi is the Chief People Officer for the automotive and farm equipment sectors of Mahindra & Mahindra. It's obviously the biggest division in M&M. It is one of India's leading automobile manufacturers, especially SUVs, the Scorpios, and the XUVs that we all see all around us. Mahindra has been buying companies left, right, center. Many of them, and I really wonder how Mr. Tripathi has been managing the integration. There's a Korean company, there's Punjab Tractors, there's an electric vehicle company, Reva. So a lot of work. And Mr. Tripathi has earlier worked with Eicher Motors, Jindal Saw, SAIL, and Cement Corporation. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us tonight. And finally, we have someone who's from the other side, Raja Lahiri of Grant Thornton, India. Get some applause. So Raja Lahiri is partner, advisory, and the Western Region Markets Leader for Grant Thornton, India. And in case you're wondering what Grant Thornton is doing in an HR panel, it would interest you to know that Raja has swung more than 240 deals, mergers and acquisitions. So he's an expert at making it happen. And what goes into making it happen is not just about the money, but also about the matches between the two sides. Whether the people match, whether the skill sets match. You all know that more than me, I don't need to tell you. So Raja has led audits also at Pepsi, at Philips, Siemens. And so we look forward to a completely different, a unique perspective from him at today's discussion. And finally, Mr. Malia will join us. I've already introduced Mr. Malia before. Mr. Malia has very graciously agreed to join this panel. Thank you very much. It's a very, very powerful lineup of panelists. Please give them a very warm round of applause.
Huge amount of anxiety. It's unbelievable. In fact, one of the first things which one has to address is anxiety. Anxiety could come from many fronts. It could be from a different geography. For example, when we made acquisition of Sangyong in Korea, and since I was involved right from the due diligence stage, the first and foremost thing which comes to mind is the acquirer and acquiree. Okay. Can we manage that whole perception that there is nothing called acquire or acquiree, or even if it is, let's face it, there is a situation, but how can we minimize that anxiety on that count? That's one. The second is, I think both Vineet and Ajay have highlighted this. I will like to re-emphasize, even at the cost of repetition. It all depends, the starting point is what is your strategy of acquiring. That is going to determine all other things. And I'll also like to differentiate between an acquisition and a merger. An acquisition will have a very different HR connotation as compared to merger. And if it is both acquisition and merger, then it's a very, very big challenge. It's for example, normally one would phase it out. If we were to take example of Satyam, it got acquired by Techem and then it got merged, of course, after some time. Same we did for Punjab Tractors. We acquired Punjab Tractors and 2 years later we merged, but the dynamics were completely different. And this has a very specific relevance to the level of anxiety. And it's basically, I think Vineet did mention, what are the signals which you send to people that the top or key positions are going to be occupied by who all. Extremely important part to manage this fear and anxiety is your governance. If at the outset, right in the beginning, if people are very clear, and I find this is the biggest mistake we have done and we continue doing, we are not thought through all aspects of governance before even getting into the acquisition. How is it that we are going to, what is it we are going to integrate? Most often and most abused word in acquisition and merger is this word integration. Okay, I'm doing integration. It's a very vague word actually, because the clarity on what is going to get integrated and what is not going to get integrated. The second one is more important. Are you going to integrate processes? Are you going to integrate the practices? The cultures are so very different. You go and acquire a company in a foreign country, it's not easy. What has worked extremely well for Mahindra and Mahindra in India can be a super flop out there. So this whole understanding about what exactly I'm going to integrate and what's going to be my governance model is also going to determine a lot on how well we are able to manage that fear and anxiety.
I'll come back and ask you what you mean exactly by when you say governance model, but I'm glad you made that fear factor, because the fact is, irrespective of whatever happens, people get to know. Even before the deal is done, people get to know and conversations happen, and those sort of become unmanageable. And Raja, I'll come to you a little later because you have seen the reality in many of these cases, discussions happening. But let me go to Adil and ask him, what is it like? He's talked about managing this whole integration and that being a very grey space. What is the thought that you have?
So Shami, I'm going to look back and talk in terms of in my career till now, I must have done around 40 to 45 mergers and acquisitions. When I was with GE, we bought over the Godrej appliances. When I was with Marks and Spencer, we bought over a lot of retailers in the Middle East and acquired them. When I was with Coca-Cola and I was actually leading the mergers and acquisition practice out there, and we acquired 22 bottling plants of Ramesh Chauhan, who used to manufacture Mangola and Thumbs Up and those kind of brands. And then with SR, we acquired a lot of international companies in Canada, America, Africa, etc. Inherent in a merger and acquisition situation is a potential victor vanquish fear. A fear of victor and vanquish, potentially in any merger and acquisition situation. This leads to three things. Number one, a certain element of initial polarization between that group and this group. It leads to anxiety, rightly pointed out, a huge amount of anxiety. And it begins with an element of distrust. So there is this polarized group which is not willing to trust because it believes that they have taken over, I am the vanquished, they are the victors, and therefore the entire deal works with a certain negative scope. I have believed, and this is if I were to look at all of my 40-45 mergers and acquisitions, there are four things which have worked or failed in a deal like that. Number one, there is a clarity of domain of negotiation and clarity of domain of non-negotiation. Which means things like values that you as a company want to follow, irrespective of where you are operating from and in which sector you are going to be operating from, those are domains of non-negotiable. You go there and you say, these are my value systems. We want to integrate the value systems at this point of time. These are non-negotiable. You want to carry my brand? Then these are the non-negotiables. Negotiables are all the other processes, practices which can be as different, which can be as local as whatever you want. And then they can continue to be different, they don't need to be integrated, they are not necessary for value creation to be integrated, and therefore they can continue to create value. Because that's the purpose of which the acquisition or merger has happened. And therefore you've got to be clear about what is your domain of negotiation and what is your domain of non-negotiation. The third is a false sense of cultural jingoism. The first time I negotiated at Stenlo, this time when we took over the Shell plant, the union clearly told me, we are very happy with our culture. We have no desire to adopt the Indian culture in India. Upfront as a affront to the whole thing. And we had to then explain to him what it meant. So please for a minute don't believe that you are going to, the greatest blunder that most companies do in mergers and acquisitions is to believe that you are going to create a mini India wherever you go, or your culture into whichever setup you take it. You've got to be respectful of the culture of that enterprise and identify what you want to integrate and what you don't want to integrate. So you should, number one, not go with a sense of cultural jingoism. And the third, and sorry, I have a total disagreement with you, and of course you have succeeded, you are sure to tell your story. But unless and until you have a very structured change acceleration and migration program which identifies how are you going to integrate and really get the value that you really want, whether you want to call it the 100-day plan, or if minus all the Saturday, Sundays, it is a 70-day plan, or whatever that plan is, what are you going to do, in what kind of time frame, how is the process going to work, and it's not that magic and miracle is going to make the process work. You need to be structured about it. That's what my learnings have been, so I thought I'd share it.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot for sharing that. And now 45 mergers and acquisitions. That's impressive. Raja, I was quite impressed when he said that he was part of the due diligence. Very few people actually, when I speak to a lot of HR heads, very few people say they are actually part. They come on board at the time when the conversation is happening. They are brought in as an afterthought, after the two founders have met and decided that they want to merge or acquire. Very many times the people piece is actually the last part to be discussed. What is your sense of it, having observed a lot of deals from the outside?
So I guess clearly to take your first point, when you said 30% of mergers are not successful, there's obviously various statistics going around, but globally in certain reports you will actually see 70% so-called M&A don't succeed. But the flip side to the story is, but if you look globally again, there are enough examples why M&A is just not another strategy, but it is a part and a DNA of any company strategy. So first of all, while it's important to dwell on failures, but the point is, what I'm going to make is M&A is an inherent part of any company strategy, and we have very senior people on the table from large corporations which have done significant number of acquisitions. Now, the point is, I just want to, if I may have your permission to talk about just a little bit before your question of due diligence. I think if you look at the India story, fundamentally, we are sitting in a market which which is $50 billion of M&A activity in 2014. It's a pretty large market. And if you see the market, and in my experience, and having doing transactions from early 2000, it's 15 years. We came from a very small base, where there were very few acquisitions. And having seen the kind of play that has evolved over time, I think we saw a phase where Indian companies were acquiring a lot of companies abroad. There were a lot of lessons learned, and I actually genuinely feel there were a lot of mishaps also that happened. And I can give you an example. This was obviously, I can't take any names, but we were advising a pretty large Indian company which had done several acquisitions. It's in the services space, and it was one of the first acquisitions in the US. And as you know, we talked about services and manufacturing, but services space, clearly the most important thing is the people. Fundamentally, why you acquire? You're really acquiring for your clients, for customers, and second is really the talent, the people. And this was their first acquisition, and everybody everything was extremely focused on due diligence, the strategic rationale, and all of that, all the good stuff on integration. But fundamentally, what happened was the communication. Because, when we make acquisitions, if I may use, it's a very glamorous word to announce that, I have acquired another company. It's seldom, if you notice people talking, I haven't merged, I have acquired another company. Stock prices go up, there is a lot of excitement in the marketplace. But what it does, to as obviously respected panelists talked about, is the impact on the acquiree. In that situation, the acquisition work was, and there was a lot of push to give processes, 100-day communication, integration plan, and all of that. But what happened within 6 months was the founders and majority of the people actually left the organization, the target. And one of the key lessons that I kind of asked that what the group learned was very clearly is sometimes we get very excited by the word integration, but sometimes it is better not to integrate. Because everybody, like every acquisition, is unique. So sometimes we get very caught in this word of integration, trying to merge and all of that. It may be useful to just leave the company in its own identity.
So basically, let the culture be, because you're saying you've acquired it for a certain dynamism, certain ethos that it has,
Yes.
and that is thanks to its people and their values. So you're saying not to integrate, but let them be, and be very clear-headed about it.
Very clear-headed about it, and that's one perspective. The second part, coming to your question of due diligence, again, globally, if you look at it, one of the key issues of failures of M&A, and one of the most important processes of M&A is actually due diligence. It is the most important part. And
Do you find, in your experience, people discussing the people value of what they want out of when they merge with another company or they acquire a company? Do you find people talking about the people issues first, or they talk only about the numbers and the market and all of that?
No, I think people is inherent in any organization, and having kind of the other side of the table on deals, I absolutely believe it is the way you strategize a transaction. You can talk about valuations, you can talk about due diligence, you can talk about cash flows, but ultimately what you really buy for, it's the people. So absolutely, in my experience, the deal maker, if you talk about the strategic think tank which is leading the transaction, I think the key aspect which is driven is people. Because especially for certain sectors like services sector, if you don't have the people, what are you really buying? If you do not have the CEO of the company who is managing the customer relationships, what are you really buying? So absolutely it's inherent in the process. But I think the flip side to that is a success factor to that is how you deal with those situations, because you will face significant challenges. You will be facing significant cultural issues. So it is the maturity, and it is to deal with those challenges will define the success of an
Sure. Do you want to talk about the governance that you were issue that you raised before we, what do you mean when you talk about governance?
Yeah, I was more referring to the structure, the post acquisition or post merger. What's going to be the structure? But structure becomes a little narrow in its connotation. The whole governance model, for example, right from the board constitution to who's going to be the CEO and what's going to be the structure, and most importantly, what's going to integrate, what's not going to integrate, what's going to have a very intensive interface, what's not going to have a very intensive interface. Again, coming back to my point of strategy of acquisition, are we acquiring for better reach to markets, or are we acquiring for products? Is the strategy hovering around synergy? Is it hovering? So what exactly do you want to achieve out of this acquisition? And that actually would determine what kind of governance model or what kind of structure you will put in place. And that is a very high people implication, because most of the anxieties actually arise from there, because those are seen as, the dynamics or in many ways, shaping our own future. And that has to be very carefully planned. That's the point I make.
In fact, Shamini,
Yeah.
you will have to please forgive me for that, but I genuinely believe the greatest blunder why 60 to 70% of mergers and acquisitions fail is because at the due diligence time there is a huge amount of dependence on the investment banker or on the consultant to do the due diligence. Because first of all, let's understand what is the due diligence of people a third party can do for you. He will be able to tell you whether they have licenses and permissions or not. They'll be able to tell you how many numbers of people and what categories of skills they have. They'll be able to tell you whether their social securities have been paid or not paid, how many labor disputes are there. But that's statistics, that's not people. Tremendous amount of your sale purchase agreement and your clauses that you will put in your sale purchase agreement is an outcome of the due diligence of your people audit that you make in the initial phase of it. And I can tell you that companies have ended up paying millions of dollars to their top management team because they have not seen the clauses that have gone into the people management areas of sale purchase agreements. Because there are these unclassified termination clauses which have been put, and if you don't see that, you just end up having the top management team go away.
No, but to nail that issue, have you had a key role in all the past experience that you had in the conversations when you brought on board at the very beginning, or post-chase when everything is done?
So luckily for me, I came from very, very structured setups like GE and Coca-Cola, where they really understood that. To then coming into SR, at which point they had no experience at all, and they had all the desire to go the other way around, when we had to put our feet down and say, no, that's not how we do it. We need to be involved not on the last day when you sign the deal, but in the due diligence itself to be able to identify. And the Vice Counsel prevailed.
Yeah,
To due diligence, I'll just add to the discussion that is going on. In terms of due diligence, I'm just taking an example from my previous organization, not necessarily this one. A lot of due diligence, as Rajeev mentioned, is to do with various clauses or in terms of certain hard facts and numbers. But the softer parts of it, which we talked of culture sometime back, I think to my mind is more important. And whatever amount of due diligence, and today let me add to the point you made, that HR people are involved in due diligence. I have the all colleagues have been involved in due diligence, but how much of the softer aspects can you pick up in the due diligence is really a challenge. Because the few days and the numbers and the data and the few interviews or interactions you have will not give you a feel of it. So more important is that it's over the initial days that you work on. How do you look at it? Well, typically the textbooks also mention that. The culture shaping takes place of either you have the acquirer's culture, or if you feel the acquiring company is having a culture of its own, leave it as. The third is trying to blend some of the best sort of practices that are there together. Or the fourth would be altogether dropping things and going to the fourth. This is typically the type of 3-4 options that are. Coming to culture, the other part is in terms of really going through the interactions, and part of things that came out is communication. The part you talked about was anxiety. So how can you get senior management to start communicating in terms of the basic core values and philosophy? Broadly, my understanding of organizations that I've seen around the globe, 80 to 90% of them have similar core values or beliefs around it. They are not much of dichotomy. So those are certain safe areas that you can start with, and senior management presence also gives a signal that the acquiring company employees feel that they are really wanted. Others, very often that anxiety which is there in their minds, that does this acquirer company really care for us, or it is some assets that they are taking, physical assets they are taking in terms of material, or is it some of the market or the brand they have? So that comfort coming to employee, that is where I feel HR has a very major role to at least not only communicate personally, but see that senior management is able to reach out to groups of employees from the acquiring company. To me, that is very important. The second area which is very much there is trying to quickly and in a planned manner get understanding of the key talent. Because as you rightly said, in the service sector or any sector, if the key talent moves away because of that period of uncertainty or doubt, you had it. Most of the asset valuation that you are banked on would be on key talent. So how quickly can we try to either secure or have some retention plan or bring about a good level of confidence in the key talent is very, very important. Because without them, it's not only one CEO, but many of the key talent or specialists that will have to work on.
And as I don't know, probably you told me that culture will eat strategy for breakfast. I remember you telling me that, and I think I've quoted you also saying so in the past. But really, how do you work around culture? Culture is different, it's different, and you need to ultimately get the work done and moving. So how do you deal with culture, and culture which is completely alien?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone?
See, I think I would possibly like to answer this question by changing the lens. At this point of time, I think we are using the lens of an acquirer. The way we are going in this discussion is from an acquiring point of view. And if you really want to look at culture, change the lens, look at from the lens of an employee. Okay. If as an acquirer you are looking at how do I create the value, or how do I integrate faster, or how do I don't integrate faster, what are the due diligence I make or not make. So those are facets which is more from an acquiring. If you really want to look at what the impact culture makes, then you need to turn the lens and look at it from the employee point of view. Any acquisition that you're making, you're right. There is always a bit of anxiety in any acquisition for an employee. The anxiety could be good or anxiety could be bad. There have been organizations where I was involved in part of mergers and acquisitions where people were very happy that we were acquiring for obvious reasons. There have been organizations where the employee would not be very happy acquiring. There are organizations where an employee would be wondering whether the next paycheck is going to be there or not going to be there, insecurity. There are organizations which employees would see acquire and say, wow, this is a good company. If they are acquiring my company, I have a future, not only in my country, but I'll be able to grow global. So, if you look at culture from the lens of the employee, what does he look at? He looks at the leadership of an acquirer and starts looking at you and saying, can I trust these guys? Do I feel that these people are capable to take those decisions which will fulfill the growth of this organization and thereby my growth? That's the second part to look at. They start looking at you and saying, are you a credible leader? Are you walking the talk? Whether you do town hall, whether you group meeting or focus, which you deploy different kind of methodologies. But at the end of the methodology, he is trying to evaluate you standing there as leader, that what you are talking and what you are doing tomorrow or day after day has got a resonance.
Sure, that's an
That's a
interesting
credibility.
perspective that it need not always be a bad thing and people can actually be grateful that this thing is happening because it adds a new dimension to their careers and lives. Yeah.
I just wanted to add one dimension besides what Ajay said. When we talk about culture and lot about in any merger and acquisition, there are two aspects of culture and it's very important to distinguish between the two. The first is at the organization level and the second, if it is a cross-border, at the country level. And it's very important to look at both of those in good detail because let's take example of companies in India. So if someone was coming to acquire a company in India, no two companies are same. So while one would talk about in generic terms, this is the Indian culture or India is like this, India is like that. But it will be very specific to the organization. No two organizations are same in the culture. And vice versa. There are many things which could work in the organization but don't go well in the country, as a country. So that's the other point I wanted to make, and this we experience both in China and in Korea, especially in those countries. And one very...
If you did experience, just briefly share that experience. How did you work on that?
Okay, so let me take So let me take example of say Korea. So it starts from how India is perceived. Again, from the lens of the employee, when you are getting into how India is perceived and how Indians are perceived. These two could be also very different. Okay. So they are, for example, one of the persons in some country, I can't name. I just asked, and he was a union leader. I asked him, what's been your first impression? You've been interacting with us for quite some time. So, and that was not too much of time, just 6 months. And he says, I have very high respect for Indians, but very low respect for India. Okay. And so, that was very, very revealing. Okay. If you were to reverse this situation and you were to look at, the organization, there are a lot of things we see happening in organization. I think we need to ask the question to ourselves, is this a Korean culture or is this the organization culture? Or is this a Chinese culture or is it very specific to this organization? We tend to mix both, and that's where we could land into wrong interpretations.
Let me give you an example and how religion comes into it. So we acquired the Shell plant in Stenlo, we did all of that, signed the sale purchase agreement, and of course we being a Hindu company, we took Lord Ganesha's statue and put it in the reception, did a little bit of puja. We are an Indian company and we do it in all our plants, so we thought we acquired a Stenlo company and slammed the first experience of the first trade union strike. In the first hour of taking over, they said, you are doing and hurting our religious sentiments. We do not encourage religious beliefs anywhere else, and you have started doing this. Therefore, the first strike notice was given to us. Day 1, hour 1 for a religious practice.
So I have a point on culture.
Yeah.
I think I'm coming from a global company framework. See, culture essentially, if you are able to create a global culture, and when you're acquiring a company, and if you are able to identify similarities, it makes sense. Let me explain. For example, Abbott, across 125 countries, across 3 lines of business, across 75,000 employees, we have 4 values: pioneering, achieving, caring, and enduring. We select people, we promote people through the competency and all go through that process. When we acquire organizations, what we do is, as part of the due diligence, and I have a point on due diligence, how can we make it more effective? But as part of the due diligence, we go back and check through the surveys which they have, through their attrition rates, through their feedback. Every organization has a record of data, of the culture, if you want to find out. So that's what we do. and we try to find out similarities or data points of their company culture with us. For example, there was a company which we recently acquired. Abbott has a culture of pioneering, where they had a value of innovation. Now it was very easy for us saying, hey, you know what? Innovation is equal to pioneering. Let's find a similarity. Now if you again go back to apply employee base on that and identify similarities rather than identifying dissimilarities, I think it makes value of getting people either integrated or consolidated. So that's the way I would possibly use the culture.
Except that at the right times, my experience is that all your employee engagement survey files, attrition interview files will disappear. It will not be made available. Suddenly you will not find those files. Be careful about it. I'm speaking from hands-on experience.
Due respect, my experience, I have worked with organizations, I have worked with individuals, companies, they have been able to find out. You have to make effort to find it out. You will not get it all.
You acquired good companies.
Yeah, you wanted to say
Yeah, I think just one more point I wanted to add. I would actually include language as part of also the culture. It's extremely important to understand the nuances of the language, and even within India, different states. When you go, what goes well in one state doesn't go well in the other state. And that, to my mind, is also a very, very major element of understanding of the language, a very good understanding of the language and dialects.
so. Some of the progressive companies, such as yours, have, I think, as you said, not tried to create a mini India wherever they go. So is that one of the things that is being done, where you don't try to create another mini India? And I'm going back to this global theme because increasingly Indian companies are merging and acquiring companies outside. So I thought it was important to stay with the thought for some time.
Yeah, so I think Vineet mentioned, there's no rule book, and I have not seen two acquisitions, happening the same way or the same set of things working. So when you sorry, your question was
That you let them be, that you have their own people to manage them, to sort of, so the fear factor is sort of at least nullified to some extent.
Yeah, so there are different models. I'm sure different people have. Again, I'm coming back to my point. What is the strategy of what is the starting point of the strategy of your acquisition, and how are you going to structure the whole thing? It depends on that. But what has clearly not worked, and I'm very sure of that, is imposition of culture. There is nothing called culture integration in my view. What is more pertinent is understanding and appreciation of each other's culture, and finding a common platform, finding those common threads, finding those ways to agree or disagree. The second one is equally important, finding ways to disagree. And appreciation and understanding. I think I will put it more in that sense rather than trying to impose or trying to have a common culture. I don't think that's possible.
I'll just add to that, but I think taking the point, especially when there is a large global setup, even for any global company, if you go a little more in detail, there are different variants of what we call as culture. What works in South America, what works in Europe is quite different. So I think the understanding and respect, I would say respect because there is the least you can do, is allowing some things to be there, because if you try to tinker around with your limited knowledge, you may even maybe spoil some things which are otherwise going to give you value. So one has to be a little cautious. Having said that, there would be certain processes that you may try to standardize. For example, if you look at the HR function, you may look at few processes, whether it's got to do with the performance management or certain areas where you can see some synergy and try to take them up. There would be definitely some areas like try to very gradually come down to recruitment, etc. There would be certain legal requirements, there would be some practices that you have to respect and follow the law of the land. So these are the, I'm just remembering one example, and sometime back there was a discussion. I was involved earlier into quite some divestments or selling of businesses and companies. And typically one experience I would like to share that one of the earliest challenge was that we decided to basically have a deal with a competitor. So the employer said till yesterday used to go out telling us that this competitor is not good and we should be fighting in the market, we should be having better products. And today you come and say that we are going to have a deal and you'll all cross over and go to the competitor. Now that's something quite challenging. At least yesterday you had a particular few things. Now the business compulsion was that we had to take it forward. Why I'm sharing this is M&A normally everybody focuses on just the acquisition and the integration strategy. Please let's understand as HR managers or people involved, we are also going to be on the other side where we have to see that the company goes the way it is seen by the acquirer. Because if people have the anxiety, if people pull out or are disengaged, the acquirer will also at times have second thoughts. There have been cases where people have backed out because of risks. So these are some aspects and how does one do it? So one had to work hard, and I think the part very, very prominently is communication. I think more than the external communication, the internal communication focus has to be very, very high. And by that I mean very, very open dialogues with the press. If people read in the press that things have moved or things are changing, I think that's enough damage done.
Yeah.
So how do we really work on a lot of confidence building internal communication, trying to assure people what will change, what will not change, and trying to be a bridge in the whole process. And I think that's a role which is, I personally felt in my these assignments to be very, very difficult. As a HR person, how convinced are you that this process is in the interest of the people, in the interest of the unit or the organization?
Sure. You wanted to say
I
something.
think, obviously various perspectives, but I would just touch upon, as Rajesh rightly said, the strategic rationale. Why are we doing the acquisition? And I think that needs to be clear in the deal team, whether you're from finance, HR, the CEO's office, the CFO's office, because there's a reason that you're doing the deal. So that strategic rationale has to be crystal clear. And more often, the reality is the simple question: why are we buying? Unfortunately, is the most difficult question. Most companies, and very leading companies, finds it very difficult to answer that simple question. Why are we buying? Are we buying for the people? Are we buying for the clients? Are we buying for the process? Are we buying for the technology? Because if we are clear, why are we buying? The next steps, whether it is due diligence, whether it is integration, will follow. If we are buying for the technology, if you do not have the main guy who's really invented the technology, and if you're not able to motivate him, then what's the deal? So I think that clarity is very important on the strategic rationale. Second point I would just want to touch upon is the culture, and obviously rightly talked about on various aspects of culture. I want to just share that, again coming back to due diligence, the due diligence is the only window from ideating a deal to closure of a deal that an acquirer or the acquiring has when you're interacting with both parties. That's the time when you're really observing the other party. You're measuring the other party. To give an example, more often it is not noticed that culture is just not the language, it's also about, a company is very aggressive in its sales strategy. It's a DNA coming from the CEO. On the other hand, the company is very focused on metrics. A good example I can share is HP Compact. When they merged, HP was extremely metrics driven. That's the management style.
Sure.
Where Compact was extremely innovation oriented. They wanted to build the best computer, but HP wanted to sell the maximum number of computers. Two very different cultures. So I think it's very important to understand those aspects. And the third point I want to just share is, in my view, it is not just an HR. I think it's the entire deal team. And it is also observing all the aspects when you're doing the process. So I think it's inherent in the deal process when you're doing the M&A. It's my view that I won't separate HR as a distinctive process. It's embedded in the deal process.
No, good point. But as a person from the other side, and he said that actually the iBankers and consulting firms are the least qualified to actually judge the people metric. Do you, as a consulting organization, would take that on? Do you have that competency?
Well, I would say that you possibly to interact with the right bankers. Just on a different note, but I
Need to get one at least.
but I think the deal makers, the most important perspective is the people perspective. It is not about the numbers. So any deal maker, fundamentally, if it ignores people, is doomed to fail. So that is the most important perspective for sure.
Which is why it fails. Exactly why it fails.
Not because of the iPad has possible.
But one thing which we have not realized is that we are all in La La Land. We believe it's a classical one company acquiring another company. A totally different scenario emerges when there is a PE fund doing a hostile takeover and you are the advisor for HR for that PE fund which is doing a hostile takeover. And that changes the entire scenario of what is involved. Okay? Because you are now getting into a company which clearly knows you are a PE fund, which is looking at a certain timeline by which you are going to exit, make value, sell them out to another buyer, and yet you have to motivate that team to perform. So that's again, possibly a subject of another case.
Needs a different kind of.
Yeah, I think that is a different discussion. You're right. I still agree with him in that if you have a right kind of eye and you're looking whether you are a banker or an organization in due diligence, you can find out. Let me give you indices. Look, if you are acquiring a manufacturing organization, you can go and check the EHS rates. You can check what is the quality rejects. You can check. So there are data points when you acquire a manufacturing organization. If you are acquiring a sales organization, you look at how they are loading the sales targets. What is the goods return? What is the supply chain pipeline happening? If you are vigilant and if you ask for data, you get it. And on people indices also, I think there are enough data points which you will be able to collect. What is the promotion rate of the organization? I'm sure they are not going to, there will be organizations who may be shy or the organization may be ready. It could be either or. But if you ask the right question and you ask it objectively in a non-threatening manner, as part of due diligence, you have a right to ask for those information and you get that information. Correct? The challenge many times happens, as Anil says, that there are organizations who would decide they want to acquire. And then if you are part of the team which is doing a due diligence for the sake of doing due diligence, you may land up in such kind of situation where you do not do. But to me, identifying culture points, identifying how they work on the business, how they treat their people, what are their focus on sustainability are very, very important.
I mean, it's like a matrimonial relationship. When you are in love, you don't say what will happen when we get married and start fighting. Okay? So when you are out there, your passions are running very high, you don't really talk about when the differences will come, how will you resolve it. You get into the marriage and then you say, now we don't know how to resolve it. Up front, we do not identify areas of distraught fears, areas of domains which will cause conflict, and do not agree on what is the mechanism to resolve it.
Blame the deal maker also.
Sorry?
Blame the deal maker also.
And blame the deal maker also.
Clearly the audience is wanting to ask questions, so I should carry at that. But I'm sure there must be lots of questions bubbling over. Is there anybody else who would? Yeah, please.
Deeply and passionately about people and culture and all that. Two-part question. I'm wondering how equally passionately would your respective CEOs and founders echo this feeling? And depending on the answer to that, how does then HR, other than helping to integrate the employees, how would HR influence or help the CEO or the founder or enable the CEO or the founder to integrate the employees in any situation?
Well, I can speak for Anil. Our CEO is Miles White, and he's the most accessible CEO, whether it's for an existing organization or any other organization. He goes at length to ensure to speak the same talk what we are talking on culture. A. B. Not only him, but across 3 different verticals and across all the levels right up to the country GM or the country HR or the regional HR, all of us are in same sync when we talk of some key things. 1, we respect the diversity. 2, we look at similarities. 3, so we do not at any point of time compromise only one thing, let's go down business karna. So there are very clear messages, very clear communication, and a very clear approach. So that's my answer. Your next question.
No, so if at all, and of course we don't have time
No,
for it.
but you know, he's coming from a prism where everything is very structured, very well laid out and all of that. That may not be the case for some other company.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I could, if you're personally interested, get in touch with me over LinkedIn or whatever you like. I'll take you to what GE calls the change, acceleration and migration plans, CAMP. And that defines what HR needs to be doing in a migration of culture situation. What are the mechanisms, processes and things like that, and assessments you need to put in place. You need to put in place because actually you are helping your CEO do not only migration of people, but also the processes which will end up delivering the value for which the original M&A is done.
Just add to respond to the question. Our group chairman and our CEO for Hindalco, along with the executives, was fully involved, and for more details you can refer to a case study which has been published in HBR on this whole acquisition. So at least I can share that what you really felt is where the chairman, the group and everybody concerned at the leadership level is definitely, it has taken full interest and involvement in not only the business part of it, but even the people aspect.
Let me ask a question on behalf of this is where the chairman has already bought into the fact that the people strategy needs to be in the center. Can HR front that role? Can they front the role and really, you know, inform a CEO of a smaller company who's not probably that aware?
Sorry,
It
can
should
I
be.
rephrase that? Yeah. I think what I'm saying is, in a situation where perhaps the CEO or the founder does not see similar value, what, if anything, apart from the processes and the measures, of course I'll get into, is from a more enabling level, what can the HR, softer enabling level, is there anything an HR individual?
The same thing if your CEO refuses to do the performance appraisals of his direct reports and the kind of influence you will have over him. The same is your convincing ability of trying to make him see sense in why he should be doing that.
Also, let me add a point here. You know, our assumption that all these software elements, I think Raja made this point when you were saying that, you know, people-related matters need not necessarily be only looked at by HR. Okay. Normally, the deal making, it's one of the very, very important pillars. I can't imagine, at least I can't visualize, even if there's no HR, just for a moment, let's forget that, you know, it's a big corporation and you have a structured HR. I don't visualize a situation where, you know, the people aspect, for example, who's going to lead the business? Okay. What is going to happen to the talent? Does this organization have adequate talent to run the business? I think any CEO will lose his or her sleep over this.
I would address my large part of experience was talking from multinational, but in an earlier role I worked for an Indian company, and I would still agree that if you want as an HR, you can influence your leaders. I agree with him that with any acquisitions or any mergers, the leaders or any CEO or a managing director would be most importantly concerned is that what do I do and how do I retain the leadership? How do I see that the unit which I have purchased becomes as productive as fast as possible? So their mental thinking may be economic, but their approach to the economics would be through people. So irrespective whether you are a multinational organization or non-multinational organization, it's very important for HR to play a very key enabling role to keep on supporting the CEO or managing director to convert his economical thought process into people actions, into how do you approach the business, and that's the process which we can enable.
Yeah, who was that? Yeah, please
Hi,
ask
good
the
evening.
question.
In your respective experience, have you ever come across a situation where you felt that certain HR practice or practices in the company that you're merging with or you're acquiring is better than what you're currently following, and you've taken the initiative to adapt them in your current course?
It's a brilliant point, and thanks for bringing this up. Somehow this didn't appear in the course of the panel discussion. Yes, it's a very valid point. In fact, that's where, you know, I briefly touched upon this whole mindset about acquiree and acquirer. Okay. it doesn't imply that acquirer is superior. First and foremost, if that is the assumption, it's most likely likely to fail. So one has to look at it from a very strategic, rational point of view, what Raja mentioned, and then you have to identify those areas where there will be many areas which we have experienced in which those people will be much better than you. And also it has an extremely important connotation of identifying those areas so that you don't lose on their strengths, because after all, what is it that you are acquiring? It's very rarely it's going to be only the assets, the brick and mortar assets. Okay, there will be lots of those strengths, inherent strengths inside that company. It's very important to identify very early and see to it that you don't lose on it. Secondly, those will be the points which will give you the real levers on revitalizing the organization and leveraging their strengths.
Just add, the example that I shared of the acquisition, which was basically a strategic decision. There were 3-4 aspects in the value-added products and downstream, which our company at that time didn't have as very great strengths. One was very clearly to do with key account management. When you are into value-added products, how do you manage key accounts? So that learning we picked up. The second was to do with really good world-class quality, because quality is not only for international markets, but even for your own markets. How can you build up your quality system? That is something we learned from it. Okay. So these are two examples. And the third is branding. When you are in a commodity market, branding is not top of your mind. So when you go to value-added products, deal with customers directly, the understanding of branding. These are 2-3 examples where in the sales and business system, we picked up a lot.
See, in a merger situation, this point is very well appreciated, what you pointed. Because I have done 12 or 13 mergers and acquisitions both. Somehow we did not come out with clear distinction between the strategies in case of merger and acquisition. Everybody is talking about acquisition. But merger is very important where I respect the strength of the other party and try to complement each other, and there is mutual respect automatically built in, and that's why, as he rightly points out, that will automatically be taken into account. But in acquisition, possibly it is a bit constricted, but yes, it can be tried. Having said that, I'll just add one small point that after 12 or 13 mergers and acquisition, when the other day my sister was getting married to a Tamilian boy, she asked me, Dada, I am going to face a cultural issue, what is your advice? I being a monk, I told her that see, in any multicultural situation, first is accept the difference. This is the most important thing, we never accept the difference. Accept the difference, next respect the difference, and third synergize. Now 6 months down the line, the girl who was mortally afraid of sambar prepares chicken sambar for me, and she says, Dada, this is the synergy.
So I think wonderfully said. I think it summarizes a lot of everything. But I just want to echo a very important point Rajesh rightly said. I think it's a mindset. It's very easy to distinguish a merger or an acquisition, but to have that clarity again in the head, why are we doing the acquisition or the merger, and what is really right to derive the maximum value, and what do we need to do is very, very important. The point is, there is absolutely, as I said, and I believe in it, that sometimes it is better not to integrate. There's no point in integrating because our policies might be much better than our company. And it comes from, again, Ajay has talked about authenticity and trust. If we are very clear that we want to derive the maximum value out of this acquisition, I think the first thing that needs to come inherently is respect and trust. And these are two words I don't think you can really do it in a theoretical book or do enough alternate plans or whatever it is. And I think that mindset will define the success of the acquisition. No biases, but M&M, look at how Satyam was done. It was a very, very difficult situation. Today it's a different story. So I'm sure there are enough examples of how mindset and keeping the bigger perspective in mind, the bigger purpose, why are we doing this? I think that really defines a successful acquisition.
Sangeeta here. Just want to ask, in a situation of merger and acquisition wherein everything is not that good and believe that there is no good communication happening with the employees in the company, what if an HR is building a bridge between the employees who are really not willing to retain their talent in the company, and when we face challenge in retaining those employees? Any such examples you can share with us, or maybe you can give us some tips on how to retain those employees in that situation, when giving them the confidence that your job or maybe your future lies in the company and you should trust in the company. Thank you.
Two, three suggestions. There's no solution anytime. You have to find your own solution or go to the consulting firms. The two, three suggestions. One is your own past track record is the best proof of the pudding. Your own brand, the way it is perceived, and today companies are really focusing a lot on their own reputation. Because it makes business sense. Reputation is something that travels very fast. So as an employer, as a culture, how are you perceived? Now that can't change overnight. Now seeing the situation where you are confronted with an issue wherein the going is not very good. What all you heard, you will have to work a little more. That means the communication will not be just one session. You may have to get a little more granular details into who are the specific employees, have individual chats, build a confidence. It won't happen in 1 or 2 sittings. It may not happen in 3-4 months. So all the things that you heard will have to be done with a little more passion, more rigor, and again, there's still no guarantee that you succeed.
And just to add a fourth point to Vineet's 3 points, sometimes it also helps, in my experience, to make them see the bigger picture. See, normally in an acquisition phase, people get very, very, focused on very short-term things, and they get very obsessed with those. If they start looking at the bigger picture, and it could include even your long-term strategies and all, that could also help in making them see what's in it for me.
One of the ways which most companies do is, and the greatest blunder is, you put your team out there at the top leadership level to go and take over. If simultaneously you could identify some very good people from there and post them into your other larger locations, to make them believe that now you have a larger culture and an opportunity in the larger system where you can be placed in different locations rather than we taking over your job.
Okay. One small comment here. I think the essence would be when, at the deal making stage, deal ideation stage, HR is involved. It is not at integration stage HR needs to be involved. It is at the deal making stage. Because the deal thesis is very well known to the HR leadership. I think the actions will follow. It's often seen that HR is involved at a much later stage. It doesn't happen.
Okay, we will not have any time for it. I hope your questions have been answered. And if I may add 2 cents to it, maybe the immediate bosses of those people need to be bought into your idea, and they can then convince their juniors that there is something in this company for you. Right? Because they are the ones who interact most with those people. Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you very much to everybody.